Greetings ladies and gents, welcome back to the Craft Hammer. I'm your host Stefan, and in today's video we're going to be doing bases. Pretty much every model, apart from a few vehicles, need to be on a base. Now in this scenario we do have our little flamer who is on a pre-made textured base. If you have interest, like I did when I decided to make this force, you can of course go this route. It will be slightly more expensive when you get pre-made stuff, but it definitely looks nice. Now when it comes to the bog standard black base, we don't want to leave it pure blank. It doesn't quite look that great. There's a few things that you can do, from adding things on top before you add your models, or you might put your model on first and then build the base around afterwards. In this scenario, I'm going to show you what we've done to a few bases. Now before we move on forward, make sure to subscribe to the channel and don't forget to give us a like, really helps us out. First thing that we're going to talk about are rocks. And we're going to use this dreadnought as an example. Hopefully, let me just move the light a bit. Hopefully you can see a fairly standard practice. I get some small rocks, use super glue and just put them on. Now, I wouldn't recommend only putting rocks and that's it. I would do a tiny bit extra afterwards. And what I mean is this next model where I do have some rocks, but I also have some sand paste that I use and put it in between all these little bits and between the model's legs to make it look like there is a texture to the ground where the model is standing. Now one thing that you might notice here is that it is also elevated on top of the actual black base here. What I've done is fairly straightforward. I started by first gluing on top a tiny thin piece of cork. This helps gives the model a tiny bit more of a height, nothing too major. It's not that it's there to give you an advantage, it's just to help give it a bit extra texture and to elevate it from the basic part of the base. After which, I then glued the rocks on top of the actual cork, let that set, and then I put the paste that we see. This helps give it a bit more structure and it makes it look just a tiny bit nicer than a blank base. That is the basic concept that we're looking here. You can of course just leave it lying on top, but we want a bit extra, hence why for some things I use cork, which is mostly for my hero characters. I put them on a tiny bit of cork, put some rocks around, and then a bit of paste. I have seen people, and there has been recommendations, that you use the textured paste after you've painted the model. You can of course do that, but one thing that you might notice is that the actual texture itself, it has a very monocolor. There isn't that much going on there when it comes to shadows, when it comes to the different bits of earth that you might find. Some bits might be a deep, nice brown, other bits might be more black because there's been rotting leaves and it's turned into mush. Anything can happen in the wild, so you don't really want a flat monocolor unless you're going for some sort of maybe industrial or maybe even a paved road. But even then, there's bound to be a bit of oil, a bit of water, anything can happen, so it's not going to be one flat color. What I like to do is, before I prime everything, I put a sand textured base. You can get them in bulk, so you can get much bigger tubes of them. The color itself doesn't particularly matter. I am going to prime this model entirely, and then I'm going to choose the color itself. As an example, we currently have a base that is being made. Now the darker parts are little rocks which I haven't yet finished, but in between is a similar concept as I was showing earlier, where I put a bit of cork and a bit of paste on top, and then I decided to give it a tiny bit more different colors, going from a dark brown all the way to a tan. Makes it stand out a tiny bit more. The rocks themselves will also have a similar effect, going from dark grey, bit of splatters of light grey to give it different textures and different shadows. So when this model is going to be primed, similar concept, I'm going to paint the base itself, give it different shades of brown, give it a bit of different shades of grey, and eventually another thing that you can do with your bases, you can get pre-made tufts and flowers that I will probably stick one or two just to have a nice pop of colour. So that is the basic concept of adding a little flair to your base. It doesn't always have to be elevated on a cork. Even if you were to put your model here, just add a tiny bit of texture, add a tiny bit of a rock, and then if you happen to get some grass or some flower tufts, definitely add one or two. Now, when we're going to be painting, and this is kind of going a bit forward, if you have a brightly colored model on top, so let's say that the dreadnought here was yellow, you would more likely do a darker base color just to have the model pop out a bit more. While on the other hand, if this model was, say, a very dark color, maybe black, you would want a much lighter base so that it contrasts a bit better. If you were going to have a very dark colored model and a very dark colored base, it will start blending in together and some of the details will be lost. So that is something to take into account where how you're going to structure it. If you're making a lava base, try not to have too dark of a model on top. So when you're creating your paste and you're making a little crevice where you're going to put a bit of lava, just keep in mind that you don't want your model on top to also be dark and lose some of its detail into the base itself. Hopefully this has helped. If you need any more guidance, don't forget you can drop your comments down below. I'll do my best to answer as many of them as possible. Make sure to give us a like, really helps us out. Stay tuned for the next tutorial, and until next time, take care folks.